Thank you, Mark. Dear colleagues, dear participants, it's really a great honor and pleasure to participate in this conference. I'm for the second time here, but I have participated in other activities of ECD. That's the reason why I would like to thank the organizers and also ICD for the huge work done during the year 2015. So, the title of my speech is The Respect of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms as an Important Factor for Global Peace and Security. Of course, there is a direct connection between peace and security and human rights. That's the reason why the international community wanted to promote peace and security, creating first League of Nations and later on the United Nations, are focused also in the field of human rights and in the field of in the framework of the United Nations. We have now, let's say, a legal framework. There is a charter, Articles 1, 55 and 56, who clearly say that the United Nations is seriously engaged to promote and to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, but also in the framework of the United Nations are adopted a lot of international treaties, a lot of conventions in the field of human rights, like, of course, the Constitution of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 48, and then a lot of other conventions, prohibition of genocide, of prohibition of torture and inhuman treatment, and protection of the rights of the women and the rights of the children and the migrant workers and so on. And also, it's created also an institutional framework to try to control the respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the framework of the United Nations. There are the general organs and also the monitoring mechanism created to monitor the implementation and the respect of the conventions in the field of human rights. In this regard, also created such mechanisms like the Council of Human Rights in Geneva, and also it's the High Commissioner for Human Rights. But although there are achieved some results in the field of human rights, generally, the United Nations remains an ineffective mechanism to promote really human rights and fundamental freedoms. This is for many reasons. First, it's not an effective mechanism to control the implementation in every day life, the standards of the conventions, also including the Charter of Human Rights. The limited role of the Security Council, you know that especially in the framework of the Chapter 7, the Security Council has the right also to intervene if it is a risk for violence, but you know that also at the same time it is needed not to use the veto right of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which is not easy. That's the reason why practically the role of the Security Council, especially in the field of human rights, remains very limited, although now it is thought to make a deep reform of the United Nations institutions, including also the Security Council. And the third argument also is that we have to accept that the majority of member states in the United Nations, of course, are not democratic state, and it's not easy to deal also, to work with them in the field of human rights. But trying to build an effective peace and security, the question of human rights, it's promoted and relatively effective protected in regional level, especially in Europe, in the framework of the Council of Europe, which is especially through the European Convention of Human Rights and through European Court of Human Rights. An excellent contribution is given from this court, especially after the Protocol 11, to protect effectively human rights within the territories of the 47 member states, but also in the framework of the European Union, because the European Union, it's not a union created to create the internal market, the free movement of persons, capitals, but also the people, but also it's a union of values, which means that European Union, in the framework of the European Union, also the protection of democracy, the protection of rule of law, the protection of human rights is a primary goal. And this has the impact not only for the member states, but also for the candidate states. Let's take as an example the region of Balkan, which for centuries has been, let's say, a barrel of powder or a timing bomb, but now through the aspiration also to be member of the European Union, there are a lot of programs and a lot of obligations for all of the countries of the Western Balkans to promote and to respect human rights, principles of democracy, and principles of the rule of law. Especially through the Berlin process, this process is deepened. There are joint projects with an initiative of the German government to create really a region of peace and security in the Balkans. But in the global level, I repeat, it remains, the question of human rights remains one of the main problems threatening peace and security at the same time. We are every day testifying that there are a lot of violations of human rights, a lot of problems linked with organized crime, with terrorism, and so on. Especially terrorism, it's one of the main threat for peace and security in the global world today. And terrorism is using the advanced technology of information to achieve their goals. For example, through internet, as I mentioned also in the roundtable of the supervisory of the board of ICD, they are using for different purposes internet and propaganda, for recruitment, for excitements to commit acts of terrorism, and for radicalization, for financing, for planning, and for executing also acts of terrorism. And we have the duty, because we are all touched from these acts, which of course are, I repeat, a great threat for peace and security in the global world. And we are all touched from this phenomenon, and that's the reason why we have to work together and to face the problems raised from the terrorism today. Of course, there is a legal framework also to fight the terrorism. There are some resolutions of the General Assembly, or through the resolutions of the General Assembly, you know that it's a soft law and it's also, let's say, an orientation point for every member state. There are some treaties. There is a jurisprudence also of the International Court of Justice and also other courts in the framework of the United Nations. There are also some resolutions of the Security Council, as I mentioned, adopted under Article 7 of the Charter of the Charter, and which have also a binding effect according to Articles 25 and 103 of the Charter. Within then we can mention the smart resolutions and the resolutions on the activities of the activities conducted by internet. We have also the Convention of Cybercrime of 2001, adopted in the framework of the Council of Europe, and also the framework decision of the Council of European Union in 2002, which is also improved in 2008. But to afford this situation, of course, we need to increase our performance in many directions. We have to promote dialogue and understanding with each other. We have to develop strategies to fight terrorism, to fight their propaganda, but also we have to improve the work of the law enforcement agencies in our national states, and also to increase the contribution of the courts in the fight against terrorism. But having in mind especially the work of the law enforcement agencies and the work of the courts, we should have in mind that we should respect also in the fight against terrorism, we should fight the fundamental rights and freedoms, because especially such articles as Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights, for example, the prohibition of torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, it's touched. And we have also the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights also. There are some cases in which they have found violations of the member states. It is Article 3, personal freedom and security. It's also Article 6, fair trial, which involves especially elements of the presumption of innocence, the judgment within reasonable time, the right to defense, and so on. It's Article 8 of the Convention, private and family life. Article 9, freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. Article 10, freedom of expression and access to information. Freedom of association, Article 11, or the prohibition of discrimination, Article 14. And in every case, of course, we have the duty to make possible in different cases also to limit certain rights, but always through the principle of proportionality, because these are the values of democracy. These are the values of the democratic societies, of the democratic states. That's the reason why we have to take care and to implement the contemporary standards in the fight against terrorism. In that regard, shortly, of course, in Albania, there are approved a lot of laws trying to fight effectively terrorism, but also to protect human rights. And in that regard, a special place in the domestic legal system plays the European Convention of Human Rights, especially the jurisprudence of the European Court of Justice, and the judges of all levels take care respecting these standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the lecture, and we'd be very pleased to welcome questions and comments. As always, if you could raise your hand and briefly introduce yourself would be excellent. I see in the back. Actually, let me get the second microphone. It's easier to coordinate. Okay.
Thank you very much for your speech. I'm from Tabriz Jafarov from Azerbaijan. And as you said that implementation of the resolution Security Council of the UN, United Nations, and as you said, it is very important for the implementation, not only resolution. And I wanted to ask you, as a lawyer, it is very important for me to listen to you as a lawyer. How do you think about this? And how do we have to get any experience, any result of this problem? Because of, for example, we have the same problem. For example, there is a resolution of the Security Council of the UN about the problem of Nagorno-Karabakh, but there is no result. There is no any getting, and it is very important for me. How do you think about the implementation of the Security Council of the UN? Thank you very much.
Yes, we have to make the distinction between resolutions adopted under chapter number 6 and number 7. Resolutions under chapter 7 are, of course, binding, and the United Nations can intervene also in such cases if it is threatened seriously peace and security in the world. But if these resolutions are adopted in the framework of the chapter 6, of course they have the status of the recommendations. But I repeat that, of course, it's not easy to adopt a resolution in the framework of the Security Council because you know that the member states, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have the right to put the veto, and it's not easy to take the decisions. But they can be against the resolution, but they don't use the veto. For example, the case of Libya. But if they put the veto right, of course, the resolution can be approved, and this is the problem. And that's the reason why there are a lot of projects to reform the Security Council, to raise the number of the permanent members and to change the voting process and so on. But these are only ideas. And you know that till now it's, the project has failed to be approved.
Thank you. And the final question is here. If you could please introduce yourself.
Sir, my name is Nizam. I'm from the Philippines. I'm not quite familiar with what's happening in Albania, so I just want to go back to the title of your speech. The first few words, actually, the respect for human rights, because respect is such a vague word. And when we talk about, for example, the issue of terrorism, and when we talk about respect for human rights, it's always the human rights of those who are killed, for an instance, or the good guys, they say. What is your definition of that particular word? And secondly...
Which word do you mean?
Respect.
Yes.
And secondly, in respecting human rights, do you think that there should be a balance between respecting the human rights of the supposedly good people and the human rights of those who does other things, terrorists, for example? Thank you.
Yes, the standards respecting human rights has an autonomous status, of course. It not depends from the status of the person. You have to respect human rights for every person without having in mind their status. That's the reason why this is a value of democracy and a very important achievement of the international community, and this is stressed in many cases from the European Court of Human Rights. Of course, the state has also the obligation to protect the life of its citizens, of course, and from terrorist acts. And also the state has the obligation to secure the public order. It's a saying of a German professor, Kirchhoff, I think, that a state which, it's a very interesting saying, a state which is not able to secure a certain public order, it's not better than the worst dictatorship. Of course, it's an obligation for every state to secure that and to fight effectively against terrorism. But also at the same time, we have to respect, this is the major distinction between democracy and dictatorship or states which are not democratic one. They have to respect the human rights. For example, prohibition of torture and inhuman treatment. It doesn't allow the derogation in any case, because I repeat, the torture and inhuman treatment, it's a value of democracy, and in any case you have to respect it. And the same also for other rights, and the same for the of course it's for, let's say, private and family life. But of course, in different cases, the agencies, legal enforcement agencies, has also the right to tap and to take care and to let's say to infringe some rights. But in essence, of course, in any case, it should be the distinction. It's the application of the principle of the proportionality. And the necessity, if you read the decisions, if it's necessary, the intervention, if it was necessary in a democratic society.
Well, thank you very much.
Mr. Popovich, maybe he knows better than me.
We will continue, of course, this topic with the next presentation. But before we do so, I'd like to ask everyone to please join in thanking the Honorable Judge Xhezair Zaganjori. Thank you.